Hello, everyone. Welcome to the podcast. Getting ready for the Snowmageddon that they're talking about. We're going to get walloped. The Blizzard Watch came out today. That's always fun.
Snowmageddon, I like that.
Yeah, I mean, for you, but I feel embarrassed to even say this to a guy from Buffalo and a guy from Michigan, because it feels embarrassing that we're like that the whole town is in upheaval about 12 to 18 inches of snow. It's happening.
It's old hat in Buffalo. It's like, I mean, usually like when there's a warning of a blizzard, it never happens. It's those blizzards that just come all of a sudden that sort of wreck the city. But everybody's already prepared during the winter. They got their bread and their eggs and their whatever, and they're okay. They're always prepared because you never know when you're going to get slammed here.
Yeah, in Buffalo, provisions is just beer and bread and sausage. Beer, bread, and sausage, and you're good.
Yeah, and a couple extra battery packs to charge the thing.
Yeah. No, we in Michigan we bow down to the folks from Buffalo because we get a mere pittance in terms of snow accumulation compared to Buffalo. Like the photos last year, which were just was it last year or no?
Yeah.
2 years ago, when it was just all stacked up like 3 and 4 feet, and all you could see is the road.
And Kevin, the thing about that storm that was the weirdest was the fact, and we had a horrible winter last year. But the thing that was weird about that big storm that was very infamous was that you could be literally 6 blocks away from somebody who got 3 inches of snow, and they got 7 feet. It was that much of a difference. My mother got 6 feet of snow in a suburb in Cheektowaga, the suburb that Eck knows very well, and I live about 9 miles away in the city of Buffalo, and we got about 5 inches. That was it.
What's really hard to explain to people too is, and you know more about it than I do, but I've been there enough to have experienced it, and that is the lake effect. Just in the early December or mid-December, my wife and I went to the U.S. Hockey Hall of Fame. I usually go every year, and because I'm on the selection committee, and I just enjoy going to the event.
Yeah.
And we drove to Boston, and when we were driving back, we were coming down through Buffalo, and out of nowhere, there was just snow. And my wife saying, "Oh my gosh, we're going to have to deal with this." I said, "Trust me, it'll be about 20 miles, and because as soon as you hit that sign on the other side of Buffalo as you're driving toward Erie that says lake, watch out for lake effect. As soon as you hit that sign, it starts snowing. It's like the snow knows, okay, we can't go on the other side of the sign, but once we hit this sign, now we can go. So it swept across this for about 20 miles, and then it was clear. It was just totally clear. And I have experienced that so many times where it's just for a short period of time. I lost my voice there.
Well, now, of course, here I am again, Peter. Hello, Peter. We are, I'm complaining about the fact that, in the Northeast here, we're going to get shillelied in the next 48 hours. And now I've got a guy from Buffalo, a guy from Michigan, and a guy from Winnipeg.
Cry me a river.
I know. What the heck? Well,
it's not so much the snow in Winnipeg. From my experience, it's just the cold, bitter cold.
Yeah.
I'd say in my 30 years of covering the league in the NHL, the only time that I've been colder than when I walked around Winnipeg in the dead of winter when I went to Rendezvous in Quebec City, which was the coldest winter I ever remember. You walk 100 feet outside and you felt like you were an ice cubicle. It was ridiculous. And then the walk, when you used to walk from the Marriott to the arena in Bloomington, Minnesota. It was like right across. It was like an alleyway, and the wind would just howl down, and it was just I thought, what have I taken a wrong turn? Am I in Winnipeg? That's how cold it was. I felt like I was in Winnipeg when I was in Bloomington, Minnesota.
That's crazy. Well, around here, I'm convinced that this is a big this is a big conspiracy theory because they're already talking about the fact that where I live north of Philadelphia, that we may not get much snow now, and yet but now our weather, we just got the blizzard watch that just came over the Weather Channel, but last night at 10 o'clock I had to go to the market just to buy some basic basic things. I wasn't even thinking in terms of like the storm. Like I was just going to get, I think, marshmallows.
Yes.
I think I was going to get marshmallows because we were ice skating. We wanted some hot chocolate, so I'm going over there and and literally at 10:30 at night, the market looked like death was about to was transcend. I mean, so this is definitely something just to get people to buy stuff.
I had a friend who lived in South Carolina, and they were supposed to get a snowstorm. It ended up being 2 inches.
Yeah.
But the Piggly Wiggly down there was empty. There wasn't a loaf.
Oh yeah, this market's being emptied out.
Yeah, it wasn't a loaf of bread or a dozen eggs left.
While I was there, I felt the absolute necessity to call my wife and say, the world is ending. What should I get while I'm here? I didn't think of that before I left, but once I was there, I was okay. So let's talk about the real exciting, fun stuff that we have to talk about today. Let's get on to the show. It's going to call it the 21st of January.
You'd be right there. Peter, follow me on this one.
Okay. Whatever you say it is.
Thank you.
You say it is, Zach.
I appreciate that.
I don't correct you anymore. You could call it whatever you want. If you want to call this mid-July.
I almost called it January right now. So but yeah, I have called it July a bunch of times lately. That's my new thing. I'm concentrating so much on the 2016 that I call it July. All right, here we go. Hello, Hockey World. It's Thursday, January 21st, 2016.
I'm Michael Agello.
I'm Peter Tessier.
I'm Kevin Allen of USA Today Sports.
And I'm Eklund, and you're watching the HockeyBuzzCast on HockeyBuzz.com. This is the podcast that comes to you in the afternoons, Monday through Friday, and we try to kind of fill you in on what's going on so you don't have to pay attention to this sport at all. You can just go about your lives and not worry about things. So Mike officially is now the answer to a trivia question. Michael Jello is. I don't know if you know this or not, but you are officially what's the difference between Mike Ogello and Jonathan Drouin? So that's the question. The answer is, both of you showed up to work last night in Toronto, and both of you had to work last night in Toronto. Only one of you showed up. There you go. I messed that up. But Mike was at the game last night, the Syracuse Marlies game, and you were the first one who texted me. He's not skating around. He's not here. What's going on? And what was the scene like, Mike? Because you were saying there's a bunch of scouts there. These guys, who have driven up to see Jonathan Drouin play, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, there were faces that I normally see, but there were more than a few that there were extra bodies there. I would say between 6 and 7 NHL teams were represented, and that's just a rough estimate. But even in the media lounge before the pregame skate, there was a couple whispers that he may not play, and we didn't know if it was injury or whatever.
The first thing, of course, you think when you hear he may not play, this guy's on trade watch. So you start to think, okay, well, maybe something's been dealt. Maybe he's been dealt.
Or, there's a trade that's close and, they don't want to risk the injury situation, so they're going to scratch him. Well, yeah, he doesn't show up in the pregame skate. And, I tweeted out, and then about maybe 10 minutes later it breaks that he had informed the team that he would not play, basically saying that he was waiting for a trade, and then Alan Walsh, his agent, comes out and says, that a trade proposal had been made, and that they wanted to sit out and just practice while waiting for this trade, and Tampa Bay said no, and that's when they decided that he would not show up and not play. Now the funny thing was, after the game, I talked to Syracuse coach Rob Zettler along with a couple other members in the media, and when somebody asked him the question about Drouin, he told the media that Drouin had informed him after the morning skate, so he may not have even been at the building. He wasn't there after the game.
Yeah, I'm sure he wasn't there.
But all I know is if you look at the comments that Steve Yzerman made this morning and you compare them to the comments that Alan Walsh said in his statement, if it's a question of believing Steve Yzerman with him saying there wasn't any deal close to being made and Alan Walsh saying that there was, I tend to believe Steve Yzerman.
Yeah, all this is customary, Evan, right? This is normal stuff, normal.
Well, not really, but the one thing that I find curious about this is everybody just blaming Alan Walsh for this, and two things I want to point out. First of all, Alan Walsh works for Drouin, number one, and secondly, in the old days, agents seemed to have almost sort of a power over players. They did sort of guide them, they mentored them, and all that. But I think all that has changed. Um, Today's players, modern players, even at a young age, are have this kind of sense of entitlement, and I don't think we should automatically reach the conclusion that this is all Alan Walsh's doing. I mean, Jonathan Drouin has to go along with all of this. Like
Right.
he understands all this. He gets it. I mean, if Alan Walsh was saying this is what we ought to do, maybe that's possible. But Drouin knows he has the ability to say, well, I don't feel comfortable doing this. So anyway, for people just to say this is all Alan Walsh is doing and not the player, I think you got to hold the player accountable here. Like,
You do.
This is his decision. He's gone along with this. Maybe Alan Walsh laid out the options, and maybe this is the way they see it. But I will say that the reaction around the league has not been favorable toward Mr. Drouin. Now, saying all that, they'll still trade for him because he's a talented guy.
Somebody will pick him up.
Oh,
No,
yeah.
I know, you're right about that. That will happen. I mean, you're being kind. And you're definitely you're doing you're doing the right thing here with reporting, because I agree with you to an extent. But then if you look at Alan Walsh's job exactly, I texted something to Mike. I used a different terminology that I'm going to use now. But he's not a great agent, no matter how you slice it, because either Duran is just doing this and he has not been able to convince Duran that this is a horrible idea, or and Duran's, so he's just, in that case, okay, I'm not, maybe, I mean, I've been in situations where agents have been around players. Like, I knew the agent of Tim Thomas when Tim Thomas went on Facebook and did all that stuff, and he was like,
Right.
This is a horrible idea, don't do this, Tim, this is going to kill, you're going to get killed for this. And you're right, you can't do anything. A player can do what he's going to do, right? Or Alan Walsh is steering the ship here, and Duran. But at the end of the day, you're absolutely right. This is Duran's responsibility. He's an adult. He's a 20-year-old kid, but he's also a 20-year-old adult.
Right.
So it's a hard thing.
Yeah.
Peter, what are your thoughts?
But he's a 20-year-old kid who's a hockey player. He's not a nuanced professional in the art of contract negotiations and management of his career. There's a slight difference. That's why you have agents and managers and representation.
And Walsh, by the way, is a big-time lawyer and a prosecutor on top of everything. So Walsh knows that he's in breach of contract. He knows that.
Yeah. I mean, look, they're partners in crime. Kevin, you've raised a very good point. They're partners in crime. And I have no issue with that. But I want to know who came up with the plan to commit the crime, so to speak. You know what I'm saying? When Duran's happy, okay, let's bust you out of jail. This is how we do it. Or Duran's unhappy, okay, I'll bust you out of jail. This is how I'm going to do it. And that's sort of where I lean to with the dynamic between the two.
Yeah, but when you rob the bank, two guys rob the bank, no matter who planned it, they both go to jail for 20 years.
Absolutely.
Right.
I know, I agree. I'm just saying
they're both guilty in
one's
that
the
way.
mastermind, the other's doing the
One should know better in this case. That's what bothers me about it.
getaway car.
One
right?
should know better, right? Like, one should know, and not to say that John, I mean, but like you say, but when you say he's a hockey player, yeah, he is a hockey player, and all his life has been determined about, I'm going to do whatever I can to become a better hockey player. That's his whole existence, has been like training and hockey and do this and that. And now he's in that actual legal dispute to a degree. And there's nothing. I mean, this guy didn't go to college. There's nothing, and that's not against him. It's just that he's in his spot. This is why you have agents. Exactly what you said. But I'm going to throw this in front of the court. Okay, all the other stuff that's happened here doesn't make Alan Walsh look like he's the innocent one in this, because there's a lot of other extraneous things here. Does Walsh have to come out and say that they've requested a trade? I mean, Duran didn't say that.
I'm not saying Alan Walsh bears no responsibility. I'm just saying, for everybody that thinks that Drouin is innocent, I'm just not buying that.
Right.
No, I think Duran has bought into this, and I think he's setting the agenda, and what's going on is Alan Walsh's playbook is being used here, because he's done this in terms of with Halak in Montreal. I think there was something with Derek Brassard in Columbus where he was trying to get him either a new contract or a trade. This is consistent with Walsh and some of the things that he does.
Absolutely.
But in and of itself, this is Drouin wants out of Tampa because he knows that he's not going to, at least his perception is he's not getting a fair shake from John Cooper, and he thinks he needs to go someplace else to thrive in his career. I saw somebody tweet out today that Drouin has played 38, I think it's 38 games this year, or been available for 38 games, and if he plays over 40, that 1 year counts toward free agency,
Right.
and that might have been the reason why they sent him down to Syracuse. I'm not so sure about that, but if that is,
It doesn't hurt when you're trying to make the decision. I mean, that's it. I mean, you can't blame it. That's part of the rules. Tampa's allowed to do that. That's perfectly within Tampa's rights to do that.
And Drouin has accepted those rights by entering into the National Hockey League under
Right.
a labor agreement that the players' representatives agreed to, and every other player has agreed to, and understand it as said is fair to them. If it wasn't fair to them, they could have stood their ground and changed it, and it's changed over time. Look, there's both a problem here, but just remember, Alan Walsh had Andre Pavlik not go to Chicago and hole up in a hotel room and told him not to answer his cell phone back in 2008 or 2009, I think it was. I mean, this is a playbook for him in terms of negotiation. I mean, I wouldn't want to be the kidnap victim if Alan Walsh was the negotiator. I mean, he plays hardball, but all the credit to him.
Well, you're right, and he's actually more.
I have mad respect for him. He could be my agent anytime. I just wouldn't want to have to deal with him if I was on the other side. It'd be a real pain in the butt.
Right, and he's more like an agent of other sports, and in some ways, this is not. There is a hockey culture, because I talked to an agent today, a football agent, who said, "What's so strange about this?" Is like to him, he was like, I said, "Well, there are some strange things about this because this is hockey. First off, guaranteed contracts and all that. There's a lot of difference, but one thing that we've never seen the lockout for is rights for entry level guys. Like there's no lockout for the rights to the entry level contracts. I mean, they really have actually lost in every negotiation. The entry level contract has gotten worse, I think, as far as I know.
I think Walsh has a little Drew Rosenhaus in him. I think I've made that comparison before, but I mean, honestly, the long term scenario of this is, this has made it harder for Steve Yzerman to make a deal, because now if he bends and he makes a deal quickly, it looks like he succumbed to the pressure of Alan Walsh. But also, right now, I mean, if I'm an NHL general manager, am I offering top value for Jonathan Drouin? I mean, now Jonathan, whether it's correct or not, Jonathan Drouin now has the appearance of being a troublemaker, somebody, and that's not somebody you give up full value for, even though he's a very talented kid. They can use that as, okay, well, he's having a problem. I'm not going to give you a first round pick and Robbie Fabry if I'm the St. Louis Blues. I'm going to give you a second round pick and something else. That's and
I don't know if you guys got to see Craig Button on TSN talk about this, but it was really good. Craig Button is, he's one of my favorite people in hockey, and he literally went on. He said, "Listen, because this is a guy who's been a general manager. He said, I've told players that when an agent speaks, those are your words. He can speak for you, but those are your words."
My point exactly. Here's my take on all this. One, that this is certainly, I agree completely with what Mike said. This is in Alan Walsh's playbook, and he is doing what he thinks will get his client out of Tampa Bay, which clearly they must have decided they want to do. Secondly, Drouin bears a lot of responsibility for this. I get that he's a young man, and I get that he's hired Alan Walsh to do his thinking for him professionally. But ultimately, Walsh works for him. And, at 20 years of age, we're all required to make pretty tough decisions about our careers. At that point, you're in college, you're picking your major. If you're not in college, you're in the workforce, you're trying to decide what to do with your life. People get married at that age. You got to do a lot of adult-like things when you're 20 years old. So for him to be exonerated as if he's just a young kid, I'm not buying that. Thirdly, I think it does make it a little harder for Yzerman to move him now. I think that's all true, just because of what Mike said. Now they're starting to look at Druin and saying, "Oh boy, is this kid going to be a troublemaker?" But four, and this is the important thing, he'll be traded at some point, and this will all be forgotten. I mean, it really will. I mean, we get so carried away with these kind of things, but sooner or later, someone will make a deal or make an offer that Yzerman will like, and I don't know whether it'll be now or 2 months from now, but make the trade. Druin will go over. We'll find out whether he was a player. He'll have some level of maturity at some point, and this will be it's not the end of the world for the kid.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I talked to last night, if you talk to a GM or an assistant GM, or I talked to a couple different ones last night as this was going on, you really got the ire that was it was and I'm sure that but I think you're right, Kevin, that fades away eventually. People will make a trade for him, but last night, oh my gosh, holy cow, there was one GM said that he had called up Yzerman specifically telling him, I completely support you in not trading him. There's no way that you've got to stay true to this. We can't let this happen. They can't, and there's a lot of that going on last night too.
Because it sets a dangerous precedent. Does that mean every 19-year-old who gets in a hissy fit with the coach, or it doesn't work, that all of a sudden he's going to go to the general manager and I want to be traded on my entry-level deal? It's no. Yes, it has to stop at some place, but I mean, I see the point of view of Druin. I mean, it's been 2 years. They sent him back to junior very early in training camp in his draft year. That was their prerogative. He was their draft pick, but he really didn't get a great chance to make the team. They wanted him. They decided. He
got hurt right away. Remember? He got hurt right away as a rookie. Didn't he get hurt his hand?
I don't think so. But maybe if I'm wrong, I apologize.
I think I'm pretty sure he did. I'm pretty sure he got hurt right away, and that caused the problems with his rookie year. And then he came in because there was really high hopes for him, and then he got hurt, and then he got hurt again. If I remember right.
I know he got hurt this year, but I didn't.
Yeah, I think he got hurt his rookie year. I'll look it up. But you're right. I mean, the last thing I want to address on this, one of the more interesting aspects of this to me was Walsh coming out last night and saying what he did, that there was a trade that he was told that was close to getting done. So he then recommended the perfectly reasonable solution of not playing Drew anymore, not to get him hurt. And Lightning said no, and that was and that he thinks he thought they were being unreasonable, and that's why the Lightning and Druin will never again eat at the same table. So that was to me, and then Yzerman came out today and said that he never said anything like that to Walsh, that a trade was close to being done. So now we have a really good thing in front of the court. What actually happened there? And that's what I spent a lot of time last night looking into, because this is what it felt like to me. Now this started off as just conjecture of putting pieces together. So, and this is still just that. I mean, I still have not gotten this verified, although I had people say that they've heard this, but no one's verified this. So but this does happen in the world of agents. So I'm just going to throw that out there. This is a scenario I've seen before with agents. When a player is trying to when a player wants to get traded, quite often the general manager, well, sometimes the general manager, if they like the agent, which maybe is not the case in this case, will go to the agent and say, find a place for this player. And the agent will go out there, and the agent doesn't make trades, but the agents have been known to broker deals, to go to teams and say, I want to get this. They want to move him. What can you offer? And then the agent will go back to the general manager and say, well, St. Louis is offering this, and this could be pretty good, right? When last week, when all the stuff came out that the Blues were close and all this stuff was really close to happening, obviously we now know where it came from, right? It didn't come from Yzerman. It came from Walsh. But to me, this feels like that. It feels like Walsh, even if he didn't have permission necessarily, was talking to other teams and saying, okay, what, and that there was a deal that Walsh liked, at least that Walsh thought was good, and went to the Blue and said we can get this done. And then there was some kind of miscommunication there where he thought Tampa said, yeah, that could possibly get done, and that's how this ended up close. And then at the end of the day, Tampa says no. I'm not saying that absolutely happened here again, but I've heard a couple people intimate it, and it has the elements of that. I've seen this happen before. Kevin, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, that has happened before, to be sure. I mean, And sometimes the GM even suggests that, saying, "Look, I've tried to trade him. I'm not getting anywhere. Go ahead, have some fun. See what you can do, because I've tried to trade your guy, and he's untradeable."
And this is a way of proving to the agent that he's untradeable in some ways.
Right. So they said, go ahead and do that. And so certainly that's happened. The only thing that I would, I don't have any idea whether this happened or not.
Yeah.
But the one thing I would say is that doesn't seem like a scenario that Steve Yzerman would tolerate. Like I just can't see him saying, or expecting the agent to go out and do that. That just doesn't seem to fit his personality. I mean, there are some GMs that might have that personality, but I don't think that's Yzerman. So
yeah, I would. And as I said, it requires the agent and the GM to be really on pretty good terms for this to happen.
Yeah.
But that doesn't preclude Walsh from trying it. Like it doesn't preclude him from going to teams and saying and coming back with, I really there's some there. You should talk to St. Louis. St. Louis has this, and this, and da.
And if that's the case, I mean, honestly, this is a deal that is very important to Yzerman, not only in terms of getting value back. I mean, if you look back at the Kyle Turris deal from a few years ago, 3rd pick overall, held out for 6 weeks with Arizona. He finally signed the contract, and less than a week later, he gets traded to Ottawa. And the return that Don Maloney got back for Turris, which was David Rundblad and a 2nd-round pick, was terrible. And Turris is a very good player. Yzerman cannot, A, allow the perception of being pushed around by Alan Walsh, and B, let go of an asset like Duran without getting a great return back, because he's got a lot of UFA and RFA situations over the next couple years, and if he puts it out there that he is weak or that he can be pushed around, then good luck negotiating with Kucherov or Hedman or any of these other guys. So I think this is Yzerman in a way making his stand and saying, you're not going to push me around, and I'll trade you when I get good value for you.
Right. All right. Now there's another story you just put into the chat room, Mike. What's going on with that story?
That was just I looked up while we were discussing. I mean, Duran was not injured in his rookie season. He showed some ability in his rookie training camp. They decided to send him back to junior.
Okay.
So he was sent back to junior. Had a great year in Halifax.
Right.
And made the team made the team as a 19-year-old. Didn't get the kind of ice time that a 3rd overall pick was. And this is the thing. I think this is a symptom of Duran not being a very talented offensive player, but you have a very structured coach in Cooper who likes players to play two-way. And I don't think that combination really meshes. And now you've got a situation where he's not going to fit with Cooper, and now he's, I think, gotten into the doghouse of Yzerman because of this situation. This is going to be tough.
It seems hard to imagine that you can't fit with Cooper.
Well, yeah. And here's another issue here too, and Eklund and I have talked about this in the past, because he and I were both at a game when Duran was playing, and I just made the point. You didn't even notice he was out there, and the reason I bring that up is if you look at some of the younger players around the league now who are succeeding. Max Domi, Dylan Larkin, Jack Eichel, Panarin, Parayko, and St. Louis. The one thing that unifies them all is, boy, when they're on the ice, you notice. They're a young player, but you notice them. Sure, they don't have the experience of a veteran player. They make mistakes, but you sure notice them. And Duran hasn't been able to do that yet. Now, I don't have a crystal ball. He just may be, slow in developing. But I do know that, the one thing I know about coaches is if they have an asset that they believe can help them win, they play them. I have never seen an instance where a coach has hurt himself to punish a player.
Right.
If they think this guy can help them win, they play him, and the reason they don't is they don't believe that. So
right. Coaches hate when guys get sent back to juniors. I've talked to a couple of coaches about that before.
Yeah, they want that asset. They want that opportunity, and they all believe they can be the one that can bring the guy out. Right. So I think Cooper, if he's not playing him, just doesn't think he's ready. Now, that doesn't mean he won't be ready at some point, but You know, and I'm sure Waltz's argument is, well, if you played him, he'd be ready.
Yeah, no, I mean, and you know, go ahead, Peter.
Doesn't that really come down to kind of the idea that the player thinks he should be playing and he's just unhappy because he's not? Like, let's boil it down to brass tacks, right? So the player has a different assessment of his abilities and what he can contribute than the coach and or the general manager. That's the crux of the issue.
Yeah,
so
it's the most basic.
I kind of live in a world where, you know what, the guy who gets fired first, and his butt's on the line, tends to be the one who gets to call the shots about this, because it's going to be Cooper, it's going to be Yzerman, it's going to pay the price.
Right.
That's kind of how I look at things. You're not going to be able to just void Drouin's contract and say you're off and running. We don't want you anymore because he's not performing. It's their job to get him to perform. So now it's like putting the cart before the horse and saying, well, you know what, Jonathan, you know how to develop yourself better than the rest of us know how to develop hockey players, and apparently your agent agrees with you on that. And I just, yeah, I do. I know how to. And I'm sorry, I don't buy that. There's an element of privilege. There's an element of entitlement to this. No one really wants to talk about it. The underlying things, because that's where it boils over. He thinks he's ready. The coach and GM say he's not, and he disagrees. So he's going to pout, and he's going to sit out, and he's going to say, and his agent's in his ear going, you know what? Your next contract's not going to be as good, and I'm not going to make as much money because they're not playing you. So we need to get you someplace else to play so you can earn me and yourself more money. Yeah, that's their angle, and I respect that. And that's what it boils down to.
This is not something that popped up 5 days ago. I mean, no. Drouin didn't play in the Stanley Cup playoffs until there was absolutely no other option for Cooper. Like, I don't remember who got hurt, but
I remember Cooper coming out and saying, "There's two nets. You got to play in front of both of them." I mean, remember that whole statement about Drouin? I mean, that was that, and for Cooper to say something like that, that's like completely out of character for Cooper to say that when asked a question about, like, for him to actually go and diss a player in front of the media, that was astonishing. Like that, he's like, I just couldn't believe it. You know, that tells you a lot.
And where's the best place for a player like Drouin of his ability and skill to learn that? It's the AHL.
Yeah, you're right.
It really is. And it's not going to sidetrack his career. It might make him a better player.
Right. This is also the funny thing about this too is I talked to a person last night who's an agent who said, you know what, this guy represents a lot of famous players, and he said the most common complaint that I get with players that are big time players like Crosby type players is that they get drafted into sucky organizations and sucky teams. Like it's like, okay, I mean, they all say, oh, I can't wait to be in this or can't wait to be that, but they are going to last place teams because those are teams that have the first picks, right? So those are the teams that have that. Drouin had the weird circumstance of going to a very good team, like a really, which is what you think these guys would want because they get to go to a team that has a chance of winning. Like he had a chance to win a Stanley Cup in his second year or whatever it was, right? So, all that's going on, and yet really, when you're drafted to a good team, this is what happens. I mean, and it might not be such a statement of Drouin as it is just a statement of the fact he's drafted to a good team. Like if he was on the Arizona Coyotes, I mean, although you could sit there and say Max Domi didn't complain about getting sent back all those times.
Yeah.
And he's a hell of a player, and he was on the Coyotes, right? So.
Well, Dylan Strome got sent back in his draft year,
right? I mean, and it's hard, and I've talked to coaches about this. Like when the guys GMs send them down, the coaches know that it's best for them. But you're right, the coaches are on the line, so they're like, if he's better than who I've got here, I want him now, But at the same time, because the coaches aren't thinking about this guy's, I mean, they say they are, but they really aren't thinking about this guy 10 years, 15 years now, because they're not going to be there.
Yeah, but if the coach is the one who's saying that he's not ready, then that's where you have the quandary because. And
it's not like, yeah, you're right, but he is not ready. I mean, you watch him play, and he's not ready, and that's the other thing. He is not, McKinnon. He's not Seth Jones. He's not the kid from Florida who was drafted. What's his name? Who was drafted with him? Barkov. He's not Barkov. He's not these guys, right? He is just not them, and he could become every bit as good as them, but he's not. He's not right now.
I'll give you.
Go ahead, Kev.
But just real quick, and I think the reason it bothers other general managers and why some of them are saying, privately that Yzerman, needs to let him sit for a while is they view this as almost a rite of passage.
Right.
Like, you have to put up with this. Like even the top players, in the NHL. Like Mike Modano's got great stories about him butting heads with first Bob Gainey and then Ken Hitchcock, trying to find his place and trying to, earn more playing time and getting the two-way respect. And, Yzerman even had issues with Scotty Bowman. This is just part of it all. And, if you're not mentally tough enough to take it, I think it bothers the GMs. Like, they see that as part of the culture, that you need to fight through this and then don't demand a trade. So I think that's just so
that's a big factor. Will he get traded by the deadline, Kevin? Do your thoughts?
Yeah. I think they'll work something out. There's too many teams looking for offense and too many teams who think, oh, boy, I could get the next Sagan or Turris or whatever. So somebody will make a good offer, but and it's going to have to be a good offer because Mike's right. Like the David Rundblad for Turris trade sits out there as okay, I can't let that happen to me.
Right.
I got to get somebody back who can really help. So I think there'll be a trade made at some point here in the next short while, and because it's in Steve Yzerman's best interest if he believes he's going to trade him, which he clearly does. Then it's in his best interest if he could get something that'll help his team now.
Yeah. The question is, I guess, what kind of team? Any team can take him on because his salary is really low. So there's a lot of options here. That's the other thing about this. I mean, people are comparing this to the Lindros situation, which was very different because when Bobby Clark made Lindros sit out for a year.
I continue to believe that the best fit for him is a team that is rebuilding, that can give him a lot of ice time. Because if he gets traded to another team that is competitive, say St. Louis, as we've been talking about, or Anaheim, who's in a playoff race, or Minnesota, who needs offense, they're going to expect him to do what Cooper's expecting him to do: play two-way, be responsible. I think right now what he wants to do is go someplace and show that he can score and show that he can play in the NHL, and that fits with an Arizona or a team that needs, or Toronto or a Buffalo that needs to add assets. I think that's more likely, and those teams will probably be more willing to trade the players that Yzerman is looking for to plug the hole that, if he's going to go for a player that's a now player to help him win a Stanley Cup, or somebody who's a future player who can stay with them for 3 or 4 years at least. So I think those teams are more likely than the contending teams.
Yeah, possibly. Okay. So let's before I move on to Winnipeg, which I really want to do because we have Peter here, I want to get one other thought up behind. Mark Bergevin held a little press conference, a get together today to sing the praises of his coaching staff and saying that because there've been a lot of rumors that Michel Therrien and those guys are in danger, because in any other Montreal world they would be, but right now they're not. And this is obviously a different Montreal than we remember as kids.
That was so well phrased, Declan. So well.
Don't you agree?
Yeah, I do agree completely.
Is this Montreal, or what are we talking about here? I mean, this is Montreal, right? I mean, this is Montreal. So I kept saying that to my head. Every time I would say there's no way he could get fired, I kept saying this is Montreal in my head. And they kept going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth in that loop. But anyway, he says he's not getting fired. No matter what happens this year, he's not getting fired. So that's good. I mean, and I respect him for coming out and saying this. This gives some stability to the team, whether or not you believe he's earned it or not. The crazier thing he said during the press conference was this. Someone asked him about the John Scott trade, and he said, quote, "I can't really tell you why I had to make that trade." What does that mean? Why did no one follow this up? Like this question went and was not followed up. Like, to me, if I'm not in press conferences, I usually like to sit back and just listen. But if I was in this press conference and I had heard that, did the NHL make you make this trade? That's the big elephant in the room. I mean, Kevin?
Or did your ownership ask you to make it, or something like that?
Yeah, something. I mean, no one wants to think for a second that the NHL called him up and said, and I couldn't believe that was possible, because I said that could happen maybe someplace else, but it wouldn't happen with Montreal. Like, there's no way the NHL would call up Montreal and tell them to do this. Like, any other team besides maybe there's no way they would call up the Rangers or Montreal. There's no way they would call up those two teams and ask them to make that.
Yeah.
That would be my thought, at least. But yet, him saying that really just totally threw the internet into a tizzy right now, because now we don't know. Peter, thoughts on this?
It's stunning. It's almost as weird as announcing Chris Higgins is available for trade via a news release. Like it's going on the far nether regions of Canada right now. Like, I mean, it's bizarre. Maybe there's a little bit. I mean, Bergevin's a funny guy, right? He's got a very
That's true. Maybe this is okay. I like this. Go with this.
The nuanced style of Franco-Canadian humor is also very interesting, and he
right, true.
Stuff out there to really throw everyone off of talking about Therrien, and now they're talking about this trade, and it's almost like taking the heat off his coach.
I'm buying that.
Kevin buys that.
But I don't buy it either.
A nice little diversionary tactic. I also
that's brilliant, Peter. Brilliant.
I also think that Bergevin is very careful about throwing other people under the bus. And if Don Maloney, the Coyotes general manager, asked him to take Scott off of his hands, that Bergevin would not go out in a press conference and say that was the reason. So maybe he said what he said just to preserve the confidentiality of the discussion point between him and Don Maloney. Because I mean,
but he could have said that.
No.
I mean, not that way. No, I mean, wouldn't I say I was asked to take?
No. I think Mike's right too. Peter's right. Mike's right.
Okay.
Brilliant. Everybody's right.
All right. So we're in this. So this is actually something that was indeed like I could refuse to believe that John Scott was traded just to get him off the All-Star team. Like, I could not put that in my – could not conceive of that. I mean, everybody wanted to say that. That was the conspiracy thing. I could not think – when we – last Friday when Mike and Ty and I were on the air, and Ty announces that he's just read on Twitter that Scott has been traded to the Montreal Canadiens, we were sitting there and dumbfounded as we could possibly be, but I could not imagine in a million years that this had any – especially for Tenorti, who at one point had quite a lot of promise.
Yeah.
And Montreal fans wanted Tenorti. I mean, they were complaining about Tenorti not playing for almost 2 years. So I thought there's no way that John Scott could be traded for Tenorti just to get him off the All-Star team, just to fix the All-Star problem, which it obviously didn't do anyway.
And they really didn't get much for Tenorti. I mean, Tenorti's a former first-round pick, and they got Victor Bartley, who's at best a tweener AHL or NHLer. But the one thing that was mentioned by Bergevin that's sort of like underlying, but I think the most important thing, is that Carey Price will not be back for at least 3 weeks to a month. And based on the cliff crash, the 18-wheeler going over the cliff that the Montreal Canadiens are right now, does this mean that they have to go out and get another goaltender, or are they going to stick it with Scrivens and Condon? I mean, they're in real trouble, and I honestly think that now that Bergevin has said, Therrien is safe, he's got to go out and make a deal to help this team turn it around, because
only a matter of time before Scrivens and Reimer are reunited.
I don't think the goalie is the. I mean, Carey Price's absence is certainly, the foundation of their issue. But saying that, Condon has been okay. They just can't score goals, and they just have numerous other issues. I mean, that's what Bergevin has to address. And what's interesting is, do you remember when Montreal was going well, and what were people saying? Boy, Therrien's done a nice job with that team. Do you remember everybody talking about that? Yeah. And now all of a sudden, well, he should be fired, because he can't right the ship with the MVP of the league out of the lineup.
Right.
This is an annual thing with Montreal. Every year around the middle of January, start of February, they all want to absolutely tar and feather Therrien. It happens every year. It's like, it's a seasonal disorder thing for Habs fans. It's absolutely crazy. And, Kevin, you're absolutely right. In the beginning of the year, Therrien was a changed man. He softened his approach. He learned how to interact with players differently. Look, they're all performing for him now. Then all-world goaltending stops. What do we say? Goaltending hides problems. Goaltending hides problems, and it's not there. And lo and behold, hey, the team's maybe not that great. Oh, they weren't shooting 28% again.
Yeah, but
I don't remember who it was that said that they were scoring goals in bunches at the beginning of the season, that their offense wasn't good enough. I don't remember who it was, but whoever it was, he was brilliant.
Yeah, Mike, I know. Mike was saying that, and I've never. Whatever. I don't want to go into my Tyrion rant. But let's go to Winnipeg for a second, because I do want to talk about this. I'm starting to hear some murmurs about this, Peter, and I wrote about it today, that some teams are interested if they can actually find out what Bufflin wants beyond this year. Like, I'm starting to hear that I don't know whether, I'm not saying that anybody's been granted approval. Oftentimes they're granted approval and we never find out about it. That happens a lot more than you think. To grant people just to check it out to see, if we can talk about, what Bufflin or Ladd are gonna want, right? But there's no question that Cheveldaev has to look at these two players and say they're way more valuable if someone's getting them as not a rental.
Yeah, absolutely. So the latest with Bufflin is Chevy and Bufflin's people met in Minnesota on Friday because they were down there for the game, and Gary Lawless, the TSN, sort of reported that. I don't think anyone had said that before, so he got the inside track on that as far as I know. The general consensus is the first number on Bufflin's next deal starts with a 7, and we just don't know where it ends on the second number. That's the general consensus, and if you took a fan poll in Winnipeg, right now you'd say sign Buff, trade Ladd. I wrote a piece at the beginning of the year when this is all still up in the air, and there's reason to believe the Ladd would probably be signed to somewhere near Kessler money, which I think that ship may have sailed. It should have sailed, saying it was better to sign Ladd and trade Buff because Ladd seemed to have the upside of being a more durable player going forward into his 30s. There was more evidence that Ladd mimicked some of the guys who performed up to 35 than it would say Bufflin being the player that could perform into his 30s as some of the elite defensemen in the league history have. I've sort of switched on that. We saw what happened when Bufflin left the game due to a shoulder injury against Nashville a week ago today, and that team literally collapsed. They had a 4-1 lead, and they just went belly up and rolled over on their backs like turtles,
Right.
Kicking their feet, didn't know what to do. That's the role he plays on this team. And I think Kevin Cheveldaev and a lot of the fans just saw this moment where they went, I don't know if we can afford to lose him. And that's the scary part, because that's the kind of thing as a GM, you don't want to wake up and see that and go,
Right.
I really got to get off my butt and do something. And we know what it takes for Chevy to get off his butt and do anything. It takes a lot. Mike,
It takes a cold winter in Winnipeg to get him out of there. Yeah, that's wow. Yeah, I have heard definitely more about Bufflin possibly returning to Winnipeg than I've ever heard. I would say in the last few weeks. I do.
But his trade value goes up too because of it as well.
Yeah, right. It does help his trade value if they don't have to move him, right? So they're in that situation where they don't have to.
But they should look at it too. That's just what you're supposed to do.
And there's such value. He has incredibly high value. It's such a tough call because, like you've talked about before, you've been really on in front of this. I thought, as far as that, Winnipeg actually, even though they made the playoffs this year, are still in the middle of a rebuild, and they're not yet looking at them like they're a team that's there, expecting to make the playoffs every year. They're still in the middle of a rebuild. They made the playoffs last year. That's great, but signing Bufflin is I don't know. It doesn't feel like that goes along with a rebuild.
No, it doesn't. But at some point, you need to have something there. I guess. It's a very funny situation for Winnipeg because you've got what on paper seems to be a very capable defensive four. You've got Enstrom, Myers, Bufflin, and Trouba, and you think, wow, how do you build around that? Well, 2 of those guys are over 30 now.
Right.
So you want to start building your future around 2 defensemen over 30 at this point in the game. That's a question for GMs. It's a question, I don't know if there's an answer to that.
It never hurts to have a wily elder defenseman. No. If you're gonna, even in a rebuild, we've seen. Look at what Mitchell's done in Florida. It's really uncanny. And what Campbell's done in Florida, right? They're both.
It's always the toughest thing for a general manager is to deal with that issue, because we've talked about this before, but it bears repeating. When you're dealing with a player who wants the lengthy contract, in this case 8 years, and it's going to take him beyond his expiration date. You know it when you negotiate the deal.
Right.
But the problem is is that even though logically you know that you're hurting yourself later on, the only way to build a championship team is to retain guys like that. Like, you can't trade away everybody just that they're entering the time when, that the length of that contract's going to hurt me. You got to keep some of those guys. That's how you win.
Right.
You can't build a championship team without having talent.
Right, and that's how you keep talent. Yeah.
Right, and that's how you keep talent.
The Jonathan Taves and the Patrick Kane contracts will be disasters in 2023 or 2024. But right now, they're great because
but they're going to have 7 Stanley Cups. It's
Right,
it's not going to matter. I mean, that team is so strong. They're just getting better. I mean, the trade they made today was ridiculous. I mean, the fact that they got. I mean, this is a guy that Montreal was crying about losing. Right? Fans were crazy. I thought I like Smith Pelly. I think I'm in the minority with that one for some reason. Yeah. But I really loved. But Yuri Sikic, I think I said that right. He is like Asher. Yeah, this guy has talent, and you throw him onto Chicago with a bunch of other talented players, he could suddenly be a star.
Well, if he's placed in a top 6 role, if all of a sudden they kick Andrew Shaw off the top line and put Yuri Seacash on there, yeah, he could score 20 goals. But
that's the amazing thing about a team like Chicago, though. They can do that.
Sure.
I mean, they can put on a third line, which is just as good as most teams' top 6. So that's just fine as well. So he's going to be playing with talent no matter how you slice it, right? So I don't think Taves and Patrick Kane's contracts will ever be looked like that, Mike. I mean, I think that because even when they're making too much money, people will remember all the rings, and that it's one thing when you win. Like, if you win like that, you're okay. I mean,
if they're still healthy and still good players at age 35, then yes, you're right. But I'm saying if they start to get injured 8 years down the line, people are going to say, "Oh my God, $10.5 million for guys who can't play anymore." That's it. Well, it's always the here and the now.
That's the the practical application of the contract. But really, what you're paying for is you're giving them more money for the years now when they're going to be good. I mean,
sure.
We've talked about before. My theory that it's now become about the big number, not the average. And the way GMs have to look at this is, okay, you're not really paying $10.5 million now for Taves and Kane. You're really paying them like $15 million for now.
Yeah. Exactly.
And then at the end you're paying a little less, but the way the cap works, it's going to be all averaged out. So, my point on all that is, I feel sorry for Winnipeg. I mean, they're in a tough spot because you still not quite there yet. I mean, they need guys like Byfuglien and Andrew Ladd. Although, you can certainly make a case that they're going to get a lot for him, even as a rental. Like, I think Byfuglien there's a bromance with Byfuglien around the NHL, and the industry standard of a first-round pick, a prospect, an A prospect and a B prospect, or a second-round pick. I don't think that's unthinkable. I think they could get that even on a rental.
And if you can extend him, why not do that? Well, if you can extend him and bring him back.
The only thing I would say about that is it's too much work.
Yeah.
I mean, before the February 29th, like, these contracts now, especially with everybody talking about lockout insurance and all that, they're not easily accomplished in this short amount of time we have left. So
yeah, no, that's true. But what I'm thinking more in terms of Winnipeg. I'm thinking, like, if Winnipeg knows that Byfuglien's willing to come back, why don't you Antoine Vermette this thing?
But that's dangerous. I mean, because
I agree.
So sometimes they don't come back. They get there and they find out that the grass is greener, and boy,
there are nicer places to live.
But sometimes these teams, all they really want is to find out what the parameters that a player is expecting in free agency. Right. If say Florida is interested in Byfuglien, and Dale Talon goes to Cheveldayoff and says, I want to talk to Byfuglien's agent before we make a trade, and Byfuglien says, oh, I would take 7.5. Well, then Talon, if he thinks that that's in his budget, he makes the deal, and then he signs Byfuglien after the year for that amount, and he's willing to give.
Don't you think they say to Cheveldayoff, what's Byfuglien want? And he's going to say,
Maybe.
if Chevy's going to get anything for him, there's going to be some transparency here, Kevin. You're absolutely right. They don't need to talk to Buffalo's people. They'll only talk to Buffalo's people if they want to know if he wants to extend there, right? Like, okay, so let's start the conversation
If I'm
now.
the owner of a team and my GM's trying to get Bufflin, I'm talking to Bufflin's people. I'm not talking to Cheveldaev and asking what he wants. I'm going out and I'm finding out exactly what he wants from Bufflin's people.
With that, just to talk about Buffalo and where that sits, the belief was that every July 1st he was to submit 5 teams who he would not accept a trade to. And that was on the old Cap Geek website, and that was wrong. This is the interesting thing. And I mean, I'd looked at that so many times before Cap Geek demise, sadly, and that was wrong. And Gary Lawless cleared it up, and I asked Gary about this on Twitter, and he said no. He gets 2 weeks to tell Chevy can ask him. He has 2 weeks to submit 10 teams he won't go to.
Okay.
And this is right in the first week of January, he goes, as of now, he has not been asked to submit those teams. So it's a little bigger and a little different. So if there is a trade to be made, to look at the tactical thing, and Kevin, you probably have some understanding in this. If you're Bufflin and his people, do you wait a little bit? Do you use that full 2 weeks, or do you know already? Like, I mean, there's a little gamesmanship here. And it's a very interesting point. And I once I heard that, I was like, oh, that changes things here. This isn't just a quick boom, boom. You know, there's some time, and they can make Chevy sweat it out a bit if there's some displeasure or whatever. And that was interesting to me.
I've always been fascinated by the lists. Like, I've always been fascinated by this. Okay, you know, and we never get to see them. You know, the 10 teams that no one wants to go to or whatever. But you never see this 5 teams I'll accept a trade to. You know, 4 teams I'm okay with.
Well, I mean, Craig Custance did a story where he asked agents that what teams are on there, and you know, we kind of, I mean, they used to be, you know, they didn't want to go to Canadian teams. You know.
That's always, it is fascinating. You know, it's and there's all different sorts of reasons. You know, I think I believe the rise of social media has killed Canadian teams in a way. I've talked to some players who are afraid to go to Canadian teams because there's so much more, you know, people taking pictures of them and all this stuff popping up everywhere, and you know, I think that, you know, not to mention just the pressure of playing on a Canadian team for a Canadian kid is always intense. Which is why, you know, Jonathan Durand in Montreal just seems like the worst possible idea in the world. You know? Just like, it seems like if there's one place he should never go to,
a 20-year-old francophone kid will be perceived as the savior, the way the Montreal.
20-year-old underachieving francophone kid who, you know, who has already got entitlement issues.
And I remember that article that Kevin was referring to, and I believe the top 3 teams that were listed were Edmonton, Winnipeg, and Toronto.
Yep, I recall that too.
And all for differing reasons, obviously.
Yeah, that changes, you know. If Toronto's one of those teams that if they're really good, people want to play there, and but they've been really bad, so you know, people don't want to play there.
Well, it really depends. The one thing that I say about the contract negotiation is that money is, for the most part, now there are exceptions, is kind of out of the equation now. Like, you're going to get your money. Like, stars know they're going to get paid.
Right.
So that used to be the big issue in the non-salary cap world, is because some teams were paying a heck of a lot more than others could.
Right.
So that used to be an issue, but that's not an issue anymore. And, you know, you can't, according to the rules, give, you know, inducements, and, you know, there's rules now about, because of the average salary of you know, front loading is harder, and you know, I mean, it's just complicated now. So really what it comes down to is players are now choosing their teams on the basis of lifestyle.
Yeah.
And, for that reason, like, suddenly, you know, they're starting to think, well, if everything is equal, do I want to deal with the Toronto media?
Yeah.
You know, and they're saying things, well, you know, like, I have a family. Nashville's a nice place to raise my family. Like, those have become real issues for players. I've had players say to me, you know, hey, I'm looking at these 2 cities because I've talked to some guys, and it's, you know, it's a great place to raise a family. The school district is good there, or I heard this room is really good and the guys are fun. You know, those are issues that were not as important as they are now.
You know, Kevin, that's such a very valid point. And, back when in our first round of the lockout and the first salary cap, I used to always say, well, you know what, now with money being finite, players are going to have to really pick where their best chance to win is. We're going to see who wants to win or who wants to money. But it wasn't necessarily about winning. It was, you've hit it. It's about lifestyle. It's about the other elements that make your life enjoyable and your job enjoyable. It wasn't really always going to be about the winning. I was really wrong about that. That's a very valid point. It's about the total package now. And I mean, just as it is for other people in other walks of life and other aspects and careers and stuff, you look at different things now. It's not just about who's the most likely to get me to the Stanley Cup. There's always a few guys like that. But you're right. It's about the bigger picture. And there are going to be teams, and I'm in a market that's one of them, that you need to be here and be sold while you're here. You're not going to learn about it by sitting in Arizona and saying, oh, yeah, I think I'll give Winnipeg a try.
Right.
It's just not going to happen. And it's a very good point.
I will say this about that, though, and I'm sorry to interrupt. I would say this, that I think that changes with age. Like I have found that older players do take winning more into account. And as strange as I've talked to some old players that just that you wouldn't think would go places, but they've gone to places because they think they have a shot there.
Well, here's the winning issue, though. The winning issue, and it's turned out the perception was really not the reality, is the reason why winning became less important for players is they found that in a salary cap world that it was hard to project who the winning teams were.
Right.
Now, it's turned out that perception was incorrect. If everybody would have gone to Chicago,
right,
you'd have been happy about it, because
that's why it's so funny you say this, Kevin, because I know one particular guy who would only go to places that had a good goalie because his feeling was that at least you have a good goalie. You have to have a good goalie. I'm not going to play on a team that has a bad goalie.
That sounds like a guy who has been on a lot of teams with bad goalies.
Right. Actually, it's a guy who's been on a lot of teams with very good goalies, but he wanted to continue his career with the good goalies, I guess. But yeah, he always but his whole thing is the unpredictability is always there, but the goaltending gives you that's the only thing that stacks the deck a little bit.
Yeah.
In favor.
Well, I mean, as I said, I think the parity has sort of changed everything. Like players now shrug and say, well, and we see a little bit of that now. Like the parity league thing now doesn't show up, or hasn't thus far shown up in the champions, because we've had LA and Chicago able to sustain, which we never would have predicted. But where it does show up is the Devils look like they had no chance of making the playoffs, and yet they're in a playoff spot. The Arizona Coyotes looked like they were going to be in the Austin Matthews sweepstakes, and they're in the thick of the very weak Pacific Division playoff race. And some teams have been better, and some a little worse than we thought. So you do see it a little bit hard to predict.
It shows what I know, Kevin. The four teams I thought were going to be the bottom four were Carolina, Arizona, New Jersey, and Toronto, and the only one that I hit is Toronto.
Yeah, well, it really is hard to predict, and I've talked to enough. I usually make my predictions after speaking to the general managers, like in the fall when I start getting to have to do that. When I'm making my rounds talking to general managers, one of the last things I say is, hey, I'm about to make my predictions. Like, who do you think the top teams in the league are? So, my pick sort of is it's not really a consensus because I don't really add up who's what. But, I bring in all that information. Well, I didn't have Arizona. I picked them last in the Pacific Division. And the New Jersey Devils I thought were going to be a poor team. I thought Carolina was going to be a poor team. So it's hard to predict this parity league.
No, it's extremely hard. And no, this is good. Last thing, I'm hearing not to the level of where I was last time when I was talking about the whole Johansson trade, but I'm hearing that another big deal is in the world right now, that where there's a hockey, and this is being told to me by an NHL source who said that I should be digging around in the West for something. And one person who actually told me that look to Nashville again for another relatively significant trade, which is kind of surprising because I thought that they would be sort of done. But I was told that this deal has nothing to do with Drouin or Stamkos. That's the only thing I was told. It's not the obvious. but that there's another big trade, a big hockey, quote unquote hockey trade out there. And you know, like I said, this was told me.
I'm pretty sure David Poyle said publicly that he's not done. I think he said he was looking at other trades. I think he said that on the record.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think he did. I just kind of didn't. I kind of thought there's not being done. We'll always look to like improve our team, and then there's we're gonna make another massive trade. Like this if this is a big deal, man, that's gonna be interesting. I mean, you know, the Predators still aren't winning, so the bottom line is that they are that this hasn't worked yet. I think it will work down the line. They're staying right in it, but you know, Colorado's slipped up into the playoffs.
You know who would be a really good fit for the Nashville Predators is one of Peter's players in Winnipeg. Andrew Ladd would be a great fit for the Predators. I also think he would be a great fit for the Montreal Canadiens as well.
Yeah, Kevin, there is some smoke around Montreal sniffing around Ladd. I don't know if they have. I haven't heard of scouts being there, but I've heard that. The other thing, 2 years ago, there was a lot of talk, and I talked to Paul McCann about it. We had some conversations. And it was corroborated by someone in one of the dailies here in Winnipeg with me that there was a lot of sniffing around of Nashville and Winnipeg, and it was believed to be Colin Wilson, who has some very strong family roots here. In fact, I know his aunt personally. And, you know, that's the kind of player that, you know, Winnipeg would be interested in. He knows the place. He comes home here in the off season.
And that would make sense. I think Colin Wilson's a good.
And I'm 97.9% positive that they would trade Colin Wilson. So.
Yeah, I think so too.
And his contract, I mean, he's got another 3 years at less than $4 million. If it's a situation where they're determined that they can't sign Ladd for that, you know, Kessler money that we're talking about, then you're getting somebody locked up, somebody with local roots. And somebody who I think, honestly, has underachieved for the expectations of what he was supposed to be in Nashville. And if he gets moved to Winnipeg, I mean, that might be...
He still has upside potential to be like a...
Yeah, there's been I think Mike's right on. There's been a frustration level about Wilson in Nashville. Because, you know, if you remember last year in the playoffs, like, he looked like $1 million, but he can't maintain or hasn't been able thus far to maintain any level of consistency as a top-notch player. Like, he looks like a top-notch player for weeks at a time, and then he disappears.
Right. So in ending today, I wanted to show you guys all a picture. This is my live rink outside my house. This is the ice rink that I built. This is a live view of it right now. So we haven't been hit with the snow again yet, but
where's the Zamboni?
The Zamboni is talking to you right now. Yeah, that would be me. But the funny thing is, so we built this big structure. My wife was really nervous about because I built these giant. The stuff over here that you're seeing, where the flags are, is a really high like PVC piping thing that I can put a tarp over top of, and then basically like drag it over the entire rink to sort of shield it from the sun and stuff like that. But it was really big, so. And in the beginning, there's a fence, so you can't see into our backyard, but you could see these things. So our neighbors were all like, "Oh, what are they building back there?" kind of thing. It was like, you know, everybody was, as they would walk by, they would congregate. What's going on? You know, what's going on back there? So I decided to buy these 10-foot by 6-foot flags. These flags are enormous. Like, you can see these flags a mile away when you drive into our neighborhood. Like, it's really funny. These giant Canadian and giant American flag. And you know, just to kind of like let everybody know that this is a hockey rink. And it's worked wonders. People are like, "Oh, I see you're the guy with the hockey rink." Yep, that's it. Come by anytime, you know. So
your neighbors may be thinking the Canadian embassy has moved the neighborhood.
Right. Over on the left, you see these are sheets. These are big sheets that I've hung up with piping and stuff like that. That's to shade the rink as best I can, because our temperature is like 33 degrees most of the time during the day, so you know it's going to melt if you don't shade it. But yeah, it's.
I don't mean to diminish this rink because it looks great, but I talked to somebody yesterday who played on the rink that was put up on the 26th on the roof of a 26th floor skyscraper in Toronto, and said it's like the most awesome experience they've ever had.
I heard all about that, but they don't have what I have over here, which is.
Fear of falling off the building and dying?
I don't have that. Behind this right over, I don't know if you can see that where my marker's going, but right over here is the Flyers penalty bench from the Spectrum. So hey,
No way.
I do. I have the penalty. I have the actual bench. When they were tearing the Spectrum down, I was in there and I'm like, "What are you guys doing with that?" And basically they're like, "Oh, nothing." So I got the penalty bench from the Broad Street Bullies era Spectrum. So it's like, it's it's on the metal poles. It's just a real rink. It's the real rink thing, with the white. But think of all the butts that have sat on that bench. So, and I keep it as part of my rink outside. So there you go. So now everybody knows where to come and steal it. Remember, guys, without the buzz, it is just hockey. We will talk to you soon. Thanks so much, Kev. Thanks so much, Peter.